start recording. So I want to welcome Miriam Nongberg here for this presentation. This is actually her second one for the GUGM event. She's also on our committee, which we are happy to have her on the committee and helping us figure out GUGM from year to year. And for this presentation, she's going to be talking about reports, quality review reports for Alma. Thank you for being here, Miriam.
Thanks so much, Joy. Hi, everybody, and welcome. So today we're going to talk about quality review reports for Alma. This is a way of finding issues, possible issues in your catalog before they become a problem. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about what I mean when I say quality review. And then we'll look at some general principles of writing these reports, and then look at some examples of what I've set up here at University of West Georgia of reports that are checked daily, monthly, and then on an as needed basis, which is usually 2 or 3 times per year. And then we'll conclude with a summary and some tips and tricks. So when I talk about quality review, this is not some amazing concept. It's just my term for database maintenance that combines a general knowledge of analytics, staff workflow practices, and local cataloging policy. So depending on your library's structure, this process could involve several people, a few people, a formal or informal team, or one person. Now, some larger libraries probably have a database maintenance unit, and those folks take care of these kinds of problems along with some other tasks. So this presentation is more for folks who do not necessarily have a database maintenance unit in their library, but they have a one person or a group of people who'd like to address this work somehow. So there are some reasons to do this, and I want to distinguish between quality review and database maintenance projects. Sometimes when I talk about database maintenance, I think of projects. You get a big report together, you work out a timetable for addressing all the issues in the report. This is more of an ongoing process. So it's a little bit more proactive, and it's a way of trying to catch any errors that might crop up before a user reports it or somebody has trouble finding a resource in your catalog. It also ensures consistency in your local cataloging practice, and it provides catalog support during disruptions in workforce continuity or when there's a loss of institutional wisdom, like if somebody retires. I was thinking about this during the pandemic also because we were working remotely. So this would be another thing that if these reports are set and ready to go, if there ever was a situation where folks had to work remotely, this could be work that's done. It also reduces cleanup tasks in the event of a system migration. We all went through the Alma migrations. It started back in 2015. We started cleaning up our data, and then we migrated in spring of 17. So there was a lot of work to do. And it also makes it easier to respond to any statistics requests from university or library leadership, or for purposes of annual surveys and so on. So I'd like to talk now about some general principles of writing these reports. And here is the report backbone for physical titles. And those of you who run physical reports will recognize a lot of these fields. We have MMSID, title, OCLC number, location name, permanent call number, description, barcode, process type, and of course our lifecycle filter. These fields in general will allow you to go to the shelf and find an item. Some people might want to add copy number as well to this list. Electronic titles, I'm mostly looking for a lot of the same fields that physical titles had, but also I'm interested in whether the bib and the portfolio are linked to the CZ, because that determines whether I fix it. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then also the name of the electronic collection to which the portfolio belongs, if there is one. If it's not a standalone. And then also the portfolio's filters are that the lifecycle, the portfolio is in the repository and it's available. So it's turned on so patrons can see it. So here's the general process that we use here. First, we identify a problem. Now, if someone finds the problem, let's say a cataloger or a patron reports an issue in the catalog, it's actually a lot easier than doing it this way. But this is the process if you're thinking about things in the catalog. Hey, these are some things I want to try to fix. This is kind of how I approach it. So first, identify the problem, and I'll go through these steps again with an example in the next slide. So first, identify the analytics field associated with the problem, and then identify the filters on that field that will retrieve problem records. Then we exclude false positives. So these are records that legitimately exhibit that problem. We don't want those in the report because they don't need to be fixed. Once those false positives are excluded, then what remains, we hope, are records that will be corrected. So let's go through this again with a very, very simple example. We want to find holding records that are missing a call number. So that's the first step, identify the issue. Second step, we're going to find that in analytics, the field that indexes the call number is called, appropriately enough, permanent call number. And so we've got that. Now, we determine how analytics stores missing or erroneous values for this field. Now, a person might say, just right off the bat, maybe we could say permanent call number is null, but that actually isn't what it is. The value for a call number that is missing is unknown. Once you have that filter, you can then run a report containing the permanent call number field and see if there are any other values that also need to be changed. And you can imagine this would create a lot of records, which is why it's always easier to start with a problem, but then you're not being as proactive. So it's a balance. Once the problem records are retrieved, okay, now we've got the unknown filter. We run the report. And now we exclude the false positives. So in our case here at UWG, we have many records that aren't supposed to have a call number. So these are records usually in our IZ only locations, such as acquisitions or reserves, some of our ILL locations. So those locations we would exclude from the report. And we can use a location filter to do that. So that's kind of the general process of running through and approaching these reports that we use here. There are many options for checking a report once you've got it set up and you want to continue to check it in the future on some frequency. So we have various analytics objects that can be used. A widget is very useful, and I have these for my daily reports. The problem is they can clutter your Alma homepage, and they also increase the time it takes for Alma to load because they have to load first, and sometimes they don't load at all, and you see that message that analytics couldn't load. Reports that you add under the analytics reports menu are also helpful. These are links that you can click after going into that menu, and they're an alternative to widgets, so some people might find those more helpful. Data visualization projects are another type of analytics object, but we do not use those here for any reason yet. So I'm not going to talk about those in this presentation, but I did want to list them here because they are an object type. And then scheduled reports are very handy. They are sent through email, and they can go to Alma or non-Alma users, which is really nice. And they do have a file size limit. Anything over 2 megabytes is compressed up to a limit of 7 megabytes. And we use these for monthly reports. They just come into my email. I have it set up so that there's an attachment that's an Excel spreadsheet, and then I can just go in and fix any records that are on the spreadsheet. Usually there aren't any records on the spreadsheet, or if there are just a few. So let's work through this and take a look at the widgets. These are what we use for the daily checking. So report widgets will run each time you log into Alma, and these reports are counted as part of the number of queries user tracking measure in the analytics usage tracking subject area. Now, if you've not heard of this, you actually have to turn on a parameter in your configuration menu to access this part of analytics. So if you haven't done that yet and you're not using the analytics usage tracking area, then disregard everything on this slide. It doesn't really apply. But if you are using that subject area, just be aware that any widgets you run will be counted in that number of queries tracking measure. And it does allow you to add the object type field so that you can distinguish between widgets, scheduled reports, and so on. But this can crop up. I have a usage measure that I run for my self-evaluation, and last year it showed like 9,000 reports run. So I do like playing around in analytics, but not quite to that extent. So a lot of those were because of the widgets I had on my Alma homepage. There were 6 or 7 widgets and they would run every time I logged in. So that's what gave me that overcount. So here's the first report that's added as a widget for our daily checking. So this is a report that finds records that lack key fields in the bib or item records. We're interested in bib records that are lacking OCLC number, call number, item policy, or item material type. And these are records that are shared with the network zone and also are barcoded. So they should have these fields, but for some reason they don't. So our main filters for this report, we have 3. We have physical item details material type is none, item policy is none, and permanent call number is unknown. Those are the 3. Now they're connected with the OR operator. So they're added in sequence in the filters pane, but then if you click on the word and, it will change to OR. So that's what we do here. These could also be split up into 3 separate reports, each one addressing one of these filters, but there aren't enough of them at UWG. So it's easier just to have them all be brought in through one report. We're including network zone linked records. So we have network ID is not null. The network ID is added in analytics when an IZ record is linked up with the NZ. So its presence indicates that that's an NZ record. We're also excluding any NZ records that legitimately do not have an OCLC number or call number or item material type or item policy. So this in our case would be records that have an acquisition process type, as well as any unbarcoded items. So these items are still being worked on. They're not ready yet for our collection, and therefore it's explainable that they may not have these fields. This report is another daily widget. It's network records in the IZ. So this report finds IZ records that should be linked up with the NZ. So what we do with these is we just share the record in the network zone. And the main filters here are network ID is null, meaning the record does not have any link to the network zone. And OCLC control number 035A is not null. So we're looking for records that have an OCLC number, but aren't shared with the network zone. After adding those main filters, we have filters to exclude records that are supposed to be in the IZ. So we're excluding our reserves and our acquisitions and our ILL locations. We exclude any bound with host records that are in the IZ. These are the records that are usually suppressed in your IZ, and they have the links out to the constituent unit records in the network zone for the different constituent parts for a bound with record. And we use a 976 field in these records that we then have mapped to local param 03 in analytics. So the report here, if I go back to it, shows local param 3 is null. So these are records that are not bound with records. We're also excluding any IZ test records. Let me go back to the report very quickly. You'll see here, title is not like test record. Those are holdovers from when we did not have a sandbox. So there's a small collection of bibs that are suppressed that have test record in the title. So those are excluded as well. And then if depending on your local policies, you may also consider excluding lost or missing titles if it is your policy to unlink those records from the NZ. We used to do that, we don't anymore. But of course, those are legitimately unlinked, so they would have to be excluded from this report. This report is for lost item maintenance. So this report is finding records for which the item has been lost for at least 1 year. Our policy here is to suppress the bibs for these records and remove OCLC holdings. And in most cases, this is what happens. Sometimes if it's a multi-part or a serial, we do not suppress the bibs. So each one has to be looked at individually. So in this report, obviously the main filter would be process type is lost. We have an SQL filter that we add on the process type date. And this is going to catch everything that was marked lost, or as best we can get as close to that process type date change between 400 days ago and 365 days ago. So we're looking for items that were lost, marked lost, 365 days ago or more. And I add that 400 days as an upper limit so that records whose bibs cannot be suppressed will eventually drop off the report. So this would be the serials and the multi-parts, or if there's a title with an additional copy, those bibs would not need to be suppressed. There's probably a more elegant way of doing this so that you can just exclude those kinds of records as false positives, and you don't have to have the upper date limit, but we don't have enough of them coming through, and I just haven't wanted to devote the time to figuring out a solution. And then the bibs are not suppressed, and we also have a filter for holdings that are not suppressed. So here are the steps to add the SQL filter. So we would add a filter just like normal. We click that icon in the upper right corner of the filters pane. And I usually go down to more columns, double click physical item details in this case, double click to select process type date. And I don't think it matters if you type date or type date calendar. I like to use calendar. And then check the box next to convert this filter to SQL. And then erase the equal sign that will be at the end. You'll see the name of the field and an equal sign. Erase the equal sign and then paste in your SQL text. So that's lost item maintenance. This next report is missing item maintenance. So this is the same process, more or less, but it's for missing items. And they're missing for at least 90 days, not 1 year. So you can see a lot of the filters are the same. Of course, we have a change in the process type and also the SQL filter. Those values have been changed to make it between 125 days and 90 days. This next report is records suppressed in error. So this report is finding suppressed records for recently returned lost items and recently scanned in missing items. So this is kind of the reverse of the last two reports I showed you. Those first two reports are to mark as suppressed lost and missing items that we think may not be coming back or will ever be found. This report is to undo what those first two reports were doing when the item is returned or when it's found. So in this case, we're looking for bibs that are suppressed. We're looking also to exclude any legitimately suppressed records. We're not interested in anything that has an acquisition or lost or missing or technical migration process type. These items have been found or scanned in. They should have a process type of none. And we also exclude any locations that are not suppressed locations. We also have network ID, we would have location name is equal to the locations that are not suppressed. This is a little strange. You'll see here on this report, I'm including a bunch of locations. What probably would have been better here was to exclude only a few locations, but either way it works out. As long as you're including records that will have possible lost or missing items that are still suppressed and shouldn't be. And again, our last filter is network ID is not null, because again, we're only interested in records that we're sharing with the NZ. And this also helps us exclude any acquisitions order records bound with host records and GovDoc shipping list records that are suppressed. So those are the daily widgets. And most of the time, there is nothing on them. The reports that get the most are the lost and the missing reports that have to be maintained. So I'm going to move into the section now on scheduled reports. These come every month through email. So you can schedule reports to be emailed to yourself or others, as we mentioned before. Reports can be sent in PDF, Excel, text, or CSV format. I like Excel because I'm not working with huge reams of data, but some folks might prefer CSV if they have a lot of stuff they're doing. And this is a good option for problems that crop up occasionally or that don't affect patron discovery of materials. So this one, you might think, well, this is pretty important, a holding record with no item. Well, these don't happen very often. So we are able to get away with looking at these once per month. This is a shared report actually from the Alma folder. So I'm not going to reproduce the filters and the fields on the next slide. Anyone can find this in the Alma folder and just copy it to your institutional shared folders. But this report is very handy, and every once in a while something will crop up with this report when I run it. This report is available items attached to suppressed holdings. So this report is going to find holding records that were not unsuppressed when a lost or missing item was returned or found. And these records are a holdover from Voyager when our practice was to add additional copies on separate holding records. So in this case, we simply unsuppress the holding. We might also move additional copies to a single holding record and then just delete that 852 subfield T. In this case, the filters are holding suppressed from discovery is equal to 1, which means yes. We exclude items that are legitimately attached to suppressed holdings. Process type is equal to none. So this would be items that are not lost or missing or in repair. And we set our life cycle to active and exclude any suppressed locations. So those are the monthly reports. Very rarely does anything need to be fixed with them, but when it does, it's good to deal with it. These are as needed reports that I just keep in our quality review folder at UWG, and I go in 2 or 3 times a year and I run them. And sometimes things come up and sometimes they don't. We have a quality review subfolder in our institutional shared cataloging folder. And that folder also contains all of the reports that are used as analytics objects in Alma. So it's kind of a safe place to gather all of them. This report is in transit items over 120 days. So this is a little different. This report is using the request subject area. And it's finding one-time physical items that were received by acquisitions more than 4 months ago, but have not been scanned in at the circ desk. So the item's been received, it's somewhere in the library, but it hasn't been scanned in at the desk. So there could be any number of reasons for this. So what generally happens is we search for the items in the report. If it's found on the shelf, there's no problem. Just scan in the item to take off the transit status. If it's not on the shelf, then that's when there might be some questions just for cataloging or acquisitions. Maybe a search process needs to be initiated, and we can go from there. So this report works because of 3 things that happen when acquisitions receives an item. So the PO line is marked as received if it's a one-time item. It's open for standing order titles. The item is placed into transit from the acquisitions department to the item's home circ desk, and a transit for reshelving request is initiated with the receiving operator as the request creator and the receiving unit as the request managing department. Also, the receiving date will also be the request date. So these two workflows are kind of running parallel to each other. And since this workflow is triggering this request, we can use the greater power and the greater variety of fields in the request subject area to define more filters for our report. So here's what it looks like. It's too large to take a screenshot. So I'm just going to give you a list of the fields used, and then on the next slide, we'll look at the filters. So we have a lot of the same fields that are used for any of the physical title reports. We include receiving date, we include request status, managed by unit, pickup location, and transit item time in days. So those are the fields that are specific to the requests subject area. The filters, in this case, we filter to include only active requests, that is, items that have not yet been scanned in at their home location. That's what the problem is that we're looking for. So the filter then becomes request status is not completed. So we're interested in everything else. We have a filter to define the minimum transit time, in this case, 120 days. We have a filter to define where materials are coming from and where they're going. So the managed by unit latest step is our acquisitions department, our receiving department. And the pickup location is the destination library. Or less commonly, it might be a work order department. If you want to look for things going from one work order department to another, you would then modify those filters accordingly. And of course, life cycle is active. This next set of reports deals with missing or invalid fixed fields in the bibliographic record. So we're looking at date type, date 1, date 2, and the language code. These are all from the 008. So these reports will focus on those fixed fields, but there is sometimes other incorrect or outdated content in these records. So when you go into OCLC and you bring in a new record, or if you have to fix it in OCLC and then export, there often can be other things that need to be looked at. If you receive a multi-match error when you're exporting from Connection, submit a ticket to the GIL cataloging team support portal. They can assist with merging records if need be. And that does come up with a lot of these records, at least in our catalog, because some of them are very old. So it's a good opportunity to clean up the bib record and also a chance to take care of some of those multi-matches in our network zone. Okay, these are some of the problems that happen with these fixed fields. So the date type fixed field, I've found all kinds of interesting and invalid codes. Usually it comes off as a pipe, a blank, or a 0. So those need to be checked out. Date 1 is sometimes a blank, sometimes it's 4 pipes, symbols, who knows. Date 2 is sometimes blank, sometimes it's 4 zeros, and the language code in some of these records is blank. So these are all records that require additional investigation. So let's take a closer look at all of these. So the date type reports, I do not have these memorized. So I go to the OCLC bibliographic formats and standards, and I have a link here to those valid codes. And I've added most of these fields here just to give me enough info about the bib record that I can search on OCLC for it. I'm also interested in begin and end publication date, because oftentimes the type of date, if it has an error or some kind of invalid code, often has, the record often has invalid codes in the begin or end publication date fields as well. So if the filters for this report, what we're interested in is network ID is not null, because again, we're looking for network zone records, records that we've shared, obviously. And then type of date, in this case, you can see this is the filter that I copied, or the values I copied from the filter, or type of date is null. Now, these values may change every time the report is run, and I will show you kind of how I do that. So first, I make to add the filter on the type of date field. When I get to this screen here, I click the little magnifying glass because I want to see all the possible values for this field. And once that happens, you can see on this left side here that we have some kind of strange or suspect codes here at the top. I still cycle through all of them. It's not a long list. And I just look for anything that's not on the list of codes on the OCLC page, and then move them over to the selected pane. And then from there, I can run the report. And then in this case, this is a report I just ran a few days ago when I was preparing this slide. And you can see we've got some records that might need to be checked out a little bit here. Got some strange coding going on. So that's type of date. So now let's move on to date 1 and date 2. So these are assigned concurrently with the type of date code, and therefore some of the records, as I mentioned, might have some other issues with those other fields. Now, some date 1 and date 2, actually I think it might just be date 2, legitimately do have a blank value or only 2 digits. So if you have an empty date 1 or date 2 with date type of B, BCE date, that is legitimate. You can also have a 2-digit code in the date 2 field with a date type of E, or detailed date. And you can have an empty date 2 fixed field with a date type of S, for single item or single date. So I have a link here to the OCLC Bib standards page that talks about the different combinations of these 3 fixed fields. I am not an expert in them, so I consult that page whenever I run the report, or I ask Shelley Rogers here, our senior cataloger, and she can steer me in the right direction. In your analytics report filter, select all the codes that aren't listed at the OCLC link and just start exploring and see what can be fixed. The date 1 report, again, we're adding just enough information to call the records up. Our filters, pretty much standard with the other reports. Obviously, we want things that are actually in the database, so we have our life cycle is active. Network ID is not null. So we're looking then also for begin publication date is equal to is in, and then you can see here, this is from the last report that was run. There are a number of different strange values that showed up. We're also looking for anything that has a begin publication date that is null, because that also would be a little unusual. For the date 2 report, same fields that are added and pretty much the same filters. We have a little bit of a change though with the end publication date filter, because there are certain types of dates that legitimately are blank or begin with a 0. And that matters because that's the filter we've added to this report to find records that are wrong. So I exclude date type E and S because E date, which is detailed date, is excluded because its associated date 2 code often begins with 0. And I exclude code S for single date because its associated date 2 is blank. As far as the language fixed field, this is a very big table. And again, it is difficult. This is one of the more difficult reports to run. What I do is look at the language codes table and look in analytics to see, once I open up the filter and see the possible values, which of them do not match the language codes table. This is pretty intensive work, so I have an alternative method that I use that I want to tell you about as well on the following slides. This is the last report that I ran. You can see down here, there are several different strange values that were showing up in the language code fixed field. And again, these codes may change as time goes on. So I can't necessarily run a report from last time. I'd have to go back in and search those filters as described earlier to see what other strange values are coming up in the database. Here's an alternate method though to finding invalid language codes, and it uses Alma. It doesn't use analytics. So what we do is, this is a physical title search. We don't search electronic titles just because a lot of them are CZ bibs and we can't fix those anyway. So we start out with a physical title search with MMSID greater than 1. So it's going to pull in all of our records in our database that are physical titles. Then open the facets sidebar and expand the language facet. And you'll see that we have many languages listed here, but one of them is this code AUT, which is not on the MARC list of languages published by LOC. And it also doesn't have a description coming through in Alma. So this code is suspect. So in that case, clicking on that code will open the bib record that has that code, and you can take a look at it and figure out what needs to happen there. This report is Serial's Foreign Agency Cataloging. So this report is going to find serial records with a language of cataloging other than English. So this is different from the language code we just spoke about. The language code is the language of the material being cataloged. This code in the 040 subfield B is the language of the cataloging record description. So the language used to describe the item in the record. And the reason this matters is that we like to have English language records to follow OCLC's policy for parallel records. So for serials, and this is only looking for serials because I'm the serials cataloger, any other type of material, I would check with Shelley. But this is a way of finding anything that has been imported that does need an English language record. We add enough fields here at the top to be able to pull any material from the shelf if needed. And the filters, we're excluding records that lack an 040 or 040 subfield B. So language of cataloging is not none and is not English. And that will pull in all the records that need a second look. I also have material type journal, because again, I want to just do that one particular format. And I'm excluding any locations that don't need to be corrected, which probably is a little bit of overkill because those records don't have 040s generally anyway, but it's just a way of keeping the report clean. This next report is portfolios attached to physical bibs. So this report is finding electronic bibs that have been miscoded or not properly indexed. And that is usually what the case is. When we first migrated and I ran this report, I did find some P2E strangeness. Some things were on physical records and they might have migrated that way. They might have just been attached to physical records in Voyager because we did make use of this single record model. So a lot of those were due to that. And this may not be a report that everybody wants to run, but in Alma, it is a lot easier to have those formats be separate. And we do use the separate records model now at UWG. So I tend not to find anything on this report anymore, except for portfolios that are legitimate. And the bib is actually an electronic bib, but something is wrong with the fixed fields. So when Alma looks for it and uses the resource type rules in that resource type table, it is coding the bib as book physical rather than book electronic. So this is often a bibliographic issue. If the bib record is a CZ bib record, and usually it is, we cannot fix those. There is a GIL policy. We do not edit CZ records. So in that case, if you wanted to fix it, I would suggest reporting the error to the Alma Data Services team. And you can do that by calling up the record in Alma. And there is an, I believe it's at the portfolio level, there's an option in the edit menu or the action menu, the little 3-dot button thing. And you can go down to report to Ex Libris. And from there, you can tell them if it's a collection level issue or a title level issue. And they'll take it from there. So this is how the report looks. This is just a reproduction of what is on this page here, just in text form. So we have just a few fields that are added, and the filters, we're looking for resource type is book physical, and we have all of our life cycle filters set, and we're also looking for available portfolios, because if it's not available, then maybe the collection's turned off, there could be some other reason, and we're not as concerned about the bibliographic description in that case. This next report is unsuppressed records with both physical and electronic inventory. So this report finds records with both, okay, so I already said that, both physical and electronic inventory. The action we take here is we move the inventory to the appropriate bib record. This is another report that has not had a lot of results lately, so it may just be something that needs to be run one time. And I think also with this report, a lot of the issues we had with this were after migration and may have been due to our use of the single record model in Voyager, because we did have a lot of combinations of things that were on one single record. Usually it was the print record that had both print and electronic inventory. So this is a way of cleaning up those records in Alma. Okay, so this is the report, the fields and the filters. We are interested mostly in the number of physical items and number of portfolios. This is the titles subject area, so you won't be able to add any location information or anything like that. So once, if you do get a huge number of results for this, I would just suggest copying those MMS IDs into a text file and then running another report in physical items to be able to find the call number information. This last report seems a little odd, but it actually, I found quite a few issues with it. And I think it just might be due to the fact that we had so many items, and especially items that of serial issues that were received, because of course that created an item record each time. And I cleaned up a number of these records and I continue to monitor the issue, but we're not receiving as many journals as we used to. So it's kind of dropped off a little bit. This report looks for items whose records in the description field begin with a number of strange characters. So they begin with a space, or they begin with a number sign or an ending parenthesis, and so on. The reason to correct these is that if you have enum A or cron I fields that begin with a space, or a description field, actually the description field doesn't matter for sorting, but it does matter in terms of display. But enum A and cron I, if they begin with a space and they're sister items to items that do not begin with a space, they will file either at the top or at the bottom of your item list. And that will cause the items to display out of order. So this is a pretty simple fix, and it does help clean up the get it display in Primo. So here are the fields we add here at the top. I'm looking for barcode, description, cron I, enum A, and physical item ID. The physical item ID is used because a lot of these items do not have barcodes because they are received serial issues. Now in Alma creates a barcode for the thing, but we don't pull them up that way. We prefer to use physical item ID. The filters life cycle is active, and then we have the following filters that we separate by or rather than and. So if I go back to the report here, you can see how you have this indented, I guess, a cascade of filters. So the way to add these, you would just add all three of these like normal, and then click on the and, it will change to or, and then do it again here, and you'll end up with that last search phrase. Anytime there's a list of search values that are coming from a filter, anytime that semicolon is used, that means or. Also, we exclude a beginning parenthesis from this list because we do have a lot of description fields that do begin with a beginning parenthesis, and it is legitimate. I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but we have quite a few, and there's no reason really to fix them. They display fine because they're all beginning with that beginning parenthesis. So that's why that's not included there as a problem. So just to sum up, when writing these kinds of reports, you can often use problems, and in fact, it's easier to do it this way, use problems reported by users or colleagues as springboards to investigate an issue. I'm sure that the systems librarians on the call or others who work in analytics, you have that kind of sinking feeling that happens when you run a report to find out more about a record or an item that's not displaying the way it should, and several others come up, so there's an issue that needs to be handled. So oftentimes you can find other records with the problem, or sometimes there are related problems. Also in analytics, consider creating a shared folder dedicated to your quality review reports. Add a note to reports used as analytics objects to prevent the name and location of the report from being accidentally changed. This matters because if the name of the report is changed, or if the file path changes, let's say somebody moves the report out of the folder, that will break the link for the analytics object, and the widget or the report will not be available when a person goes to look at it. Use widgets sparingly, just to reduce clutter. I have, I think, 6 right now on my Alma homepage, so I don't think I'd want too many more than that. Also, consider the ramifications of a problem when deciding how often to monitor your database for that problem. This is really a balancing act because you don't want to be in a situation where you're constantly pursuing things, but you also want to be able to address problems when they happen. So some examples to consider, patron access to resources, the potential number of records affected, the ability to run accurate statistical reports, in the future. So these are all things to think about. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate you being here very much. I know it's the end of the conference. It's beautiful outside and sunny. I appreciate it very much that you were here, and I'm ready to take any questions that you might have.
Hey, everyone. If you do have any questions, you can type them into the chat. Let's see, Shelly Rogers has a question. Are there other characters that could be included in reports for Primo serial description that are wonky? Maybe %, question mark, what's that, up arrow, dashes, anything that is a shift on the keyboard above numbers?
Yeah, that's a good question, Shelley. It's with these kinds of reports, the problems really are endless. I mean, it could be any type of strange character that somebody's finger hit sometime in the past that's causing the issue. So it's the % is actually a possibility, and the only thing I'm thinking of is if I include it, there are some characters in analytics that have to be escaped properly because they represent other functions. Like I think the semicolon is one of those. We have to be careful about how we're adding that to a filter. So that's definitely something to look at. Absolutely.
Thank you, Shelley, for that question. Are there any other questions from anyone? Not seeing any others come in, but you all will have access to the slides to be able to review. And I'm assuming if they have some additional questions, they can reach out to you.
Absolutely, anytime. I'm not going to cycle through to the first slide and make everybody wait, but yes, please contact me over email, or you can call, whatever works. I'm glad to discuss analytics problems with anybody. It's a great topic. So
awesome.
Please feel free to reach out.
Well, thank you all for joining us for this one of the last 2 sessions this year. And thank you to Miriam for bringing this presentation to us. Please go on to Sched and you can rate this presentation. And then probably tomorrow, no later than Monday, you'll also get a survey that encompasses the entire event, and then you can give feedback on that as well. So thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your week and your weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.